So it may surprise you because I am so me, but I don't actually like meeting strangers. To clarify, I don't like meeting strangers in a very specific way. If you throw me into a party, I will chat to people. If you start a conversation with me in a supermarket, I will cope. But if you ask me to go and knock on my new neighbour's door after I or they have moved in, then I will think of a million reasons not to. It's why it was quite nice moving here, because I worked with nearly all of my neighbours, so that didn't really need to happen. I don't like meeting people in that way. I don't know why. I couldn't really tell you why, but it's just not something I enjoy. And so, after 4 years living in my flat in London, I was on nodding terms with people who lived on my floor and maybe a few people that I saw regularly in the stairway. But I have been more friendly with random people I've seen out on walks around here than I have with any of my neighbours in London. Until, and I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but a global pandemic happened quite recently. It seemed to affect quite a lot of people. And suddenly, we were stuck in our homes a lot more, weren't we? We were literally not allowed to go out except for our one walk a day and our trip to the supermarket. And suddenly, seeing neighbours in the hallway was really exciting. It was like, hi, human that I don't live with, how are you? Let's be best friends. And this worked quite well for the people on my floor. But I didn't really meet anybody else just because people weren't outside their homes very much. Until Thursday nights, where in that first lockdown we would hang out of our windows and doors and clap for our key workers to show our appreciation. And every Thursday night, I would suddenly realise just how many people lived in my building. Like in theory, I knew there were 14 homes in there, but I never saw that many people in the building. And suddenly, I was like, oh, here they all are. They all do live here. And to be honest, I knew a toddler lived above me before the pandemic. I'm not deaf. Toddlers are quite loud, especially when they live above you. But I'd never met him. I'd never had a conversation with him. I knew that he liked to play trains and cars because that happened a lot on the floor. And that was it. Until these Thursday nights where I would hang out my kind of weird Juliet balcony thing to clap, and he would hang out his with his mum, and he would shout down to me and my flatmate and be like, hello, and make friends, because he also was missing people, and we would wave back up and be like, hello, because we also were missing people. And we would have these random conversations on Thursday nights, and sometimes he'd drop stuff on our heads accidentally, and it was great fun. And this kind of happened every Thursday. And then one day, I was sat at my dining table editing, because that's what youth work looked like during a global pandemic. And I was editing a video, and I was just done. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not having fun. This is just so boring. I want to talk to people. And then I heard something hit my window. I was like, that was weird. And I looked, and there's nothing there, and I heard no other noises. I was like, okay, carry on editing. And something hit my window again. I was like, right, gonna go sort this out. Because sometimes youths like to hang out on the corner, and I was like, I'll go tell them what's what. They shouldn't be out there. So I went and I opened my balcony doors, and there, on a piece of string, was a bag of Haribo. And I very suspiciously looked at this bag of Haribo, and I followed the string, and there was my toddler friend hanging out his window with his mum, and he shouted, for you! And I was like, oh, thanks! And I took the bag of Haribo, and I had a brief conversation, and then I closed my doors, and I went and sat back down to do some editing with some Haribo. And I was so much happier. I was so much more excited to do my editing because I had some Haribo. My day was made, my week was made, and it was actually one of the highlights of that first lockdown for me. There were a few, but that was definitely one of them. Because we're not made to be on our own. From Genesis, God says it is not good for man to be alone. We are made to be in community. We are made to be with one another. From the very beginning, God makes that clear. And then in our passage today, beautifully read by Becca, God makes it clear that he is supposed to be the example of how we are to be in community with one another. Jesus never, ever holds himself up somewhere and waits for people to come to him. He is constantly going where the people are. He's out on the high street. He's on the busiest main roads. He isn't beholden to time pressures. Often he seems to ignore the pressing thing that people are trying to get him to in favour of the thing that's right in front of him. And it frustrates people around him. It's recorded there in the Gospels. God knows how important being in relationship and being friends and being with people is. Jesus is God getting down and dirty and in the mess of life with us. Being there in the neighbourhood with us. Being able to say, I know, when we cry out in pain. Jesus marks our God out as different to every other expression of God from every other world religion. He makes our God tactile, seeable, and a little tiny bit knowable. I realise this isn't necessarily the same for everybody who lives around here, but most people live in quite close quarters with their neighbours. Lots of people have neighbours above them, below them, to either side, and most people in this country live in houses that are quite close together. We hear our neighbours through our doors shouting, we hear toddlers playing, we hear people cheering during the football. That's just my neighbours when I lived in a flat with neighbours. I actually had a conversation during, as lockdown was easing, with a neighbour that lived below me, and he just saw me. He's like, oh, do you live in flat 7? I was like, yeah. He's like, are you a Liverpool fan? I was like, yeah. He's like, oh yeah, I could tell. I was like, oh gosh, I really am loud. So yeah, that's just a little sidebar. But we might have the odd conversation with our neighbours, the odd awkward conversation with our neighbours, but they generally aren't our best friends. But as this passage in John shows us, the very example of Jesus calls us to be different. In coming down and leaving the glory of heaven and becoming a lowly baby, Jesus shows us that being in the neighbourhood is important. Being present where we are is important. He goes into people's homes, and those people's homes are nearly always bad places to hang out. They get him some proper shade from the religious leaders of the day. And yes, he goes to the temple sometimes, but it's not his permanent base. When I say Jesus moved into the neighbourhood, I really mean it. He probably knew Jerusalem and the surrounding areas really well. He knew the people, he knew the problems, he knew the community, he knew what they were facing, he knew their hopes and their fears. And as Christians, we have this terrible habit of living in our Christian bubbles, where all the spaces we hang out in are Christian, all our friends are Christian, and we end up not really knowing what goes on in the real world. But this is exactly the opposite to what we are told to do. When Jesus is praying for us in John 17, he says, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. We are called to be a part of the world, but we are called to be holy. We are called to be set apart, not segregated. Because, to be frank, if what we do in this building is amazing, if we grow together in community and we grow closer to Jesus and we have an amazing service every Sunday and we have amazing life groups and amazing church socials and that's it, it's a little bit pointless. If you're sitting here in the room or at home and out of those 5 people you wrote down, none of them are non-Christians, or for me, one of them was a non-Christian, that's a problem. A few years ago, I realised that I was in a massive Christian bubble, and that needed to change. I was working for a church, and I also went to Christian university, so literally all of my friends were Christian. And the only people I spoke to on a regular basis that weren't Christian were young people. And whilst young people are great, I wouldn't call them friends. Sorry, guys. So I took it upon myself to join a football team. And actually, I was really bad at finding a football team to join, so my friend did it for me. She found me a football team to join, and they were great. And I got made fun of a little bit. I got called vicar quite a lot, even though I explained multiple times that wasn't my job. But I also learned a lot, and I had a great time, and I made some really great friends. And I learned that a lot of what we say normally, as Christians, makes literally no sense to other people. A lot of it has to be explained, and sometimes just to explain one bit of church, you have to explain like a load of other stuff. And I had never really encountered that much since becoming a Christian. And so I learned how to speak normally to people about my faith. I learned how to be normal around people, not make everything about God, which is very difficult when you work for a church. Not everything is a sermon illustration. But I also learned just to have fun and just to be with people and not feel like I constantly had to be on my toes. And that experience taught me far more about how to live out my faith positively than any talk I've heard in the last 5 years. Now, living over here, I've already started the hunt for a girls' football team or rugby team that trains on Mondays or Fridays. So if you know anything, let me know. Because we're supposed to reach out. That's the whole point. If we're just in our bubbles, if we're just in our church friendship groups, if we're just hanging out with Christians all the time, we're not actually reaching out to anybody. There's a Casting Crowns song, who are a Christian band, and they have a song called If We Are the Body. And the words to the chorus go like this. If we are the body, why aren't his arms reaching? Why aren't his hands healing? Why aren't his words teaching? If we are the body, why aren't his feet going? Why is his love not showing that there is a way? How far are our arms reaching out right now? How big is our bubble? How much are we going to have to push to get out of it? If we are the church, and we know people who do not think they're welcome in church, then we should take that personally, because it's our job to change that perception. Here at the evening service, we want to take a step back as we emerge from this lockdown and as we start to rebuild our in-person community. We want to really have a think about what we want it to look like. It's the reason behind trialing this new time change, because we want to give more space to build community and more space to invite people in, but also more space to go out and host people. Host people here in the church, yes, but also in our homes, up on the common, by taking the bill at the end of a meal. We want to give you opportunities to have stuff on in the evening after church. We want to bless our community here in Chorleywood through hospitality. In this series, we want to give you hints and tips and strong biblical principles about how to build community, starting with your neighbourhood, starting with the people closest to you. And we don't want you to do it because you might be able to invite them to an alpha course, although that'll be great, and I'm sure that'll come along the way. But just learn to be in your community. Walk with the slow person to the shops that you bump into and you really were hoping to avoid. Take your bins out. Claire told me she did this the other day. Take your bins out at the same time as your neighbour so you can have a conversation. Just be around, not with the hope of being able to invite somebody to something or to do something, but just to get to know your neighbourhood. Because if we look at our passage in John, we see that Jesus has a very simple blueprint to follow. Get out of your bubble. I think I've made this one pretty clear. Ours is our little Christian bubbles, or maybe it might be quite a big Christian bubble like mine is. Jesus came down out of the comfort of heaven and put himself on earth so that we might know him better. And it's our job to be out in the community so that other people can get to know Jesus better. It's quite a cheesy line that gets said quite a lot, but I really like it. It's that sometimes you're the only Jesus anyone will ever meet. And so if you're stuck in your Christian bubble, how are you supposed to show anybody that isn't a Christian Jesus? And the second is this. Get to know your community in a real way. Not with the hope that you might one day fix something for them or make it a better place. Those things will happen naturally. Not with the hope, like I said before, that you can invite them to an alpha course or a youth group or a life group or anything like that. Just be with your community. Be a part of it. Get to know it. Get to love it, really, really love it. Because that is how these communities will change. Being a good neighbour starts with being in your neighbourhood. That's what Jesus did for us. He left the comfort of heaven, He put himself exposed down here on earth. He gave up all the good stuff for this, for us. And it'd be a waste, a real waste, if we were to spend our whole lives making church a great place for Christians to be. I really like knowing what I'm going to say ahead of time. I'm quite severely dyslexic, so I write my talk and then I record it and then I learn my talk. That's how I do it, because I'm really scared that I'll just not be able to read what I've written if I forget it. And so I really, to be honest, don't like when God tells me to change what I'm going to say. And so I've been fighting this for the whole day, but I'm going to go for it because, should be obedient to God. But this might seem controversial. This might seem like I'm having a go, and I'm really not. But I think for years and years and years, I've been a Christian for over 10 years now, and I've heard loads of Christians say that I feel like God wants us to get out there, to be more in our communities, to do this, to do that. And I've been like, yeah, that's great. And as I've become a youth worker, I've been like, yes, please, let's go, let's get out of the building, let's do stuff. And I've heard loads of conversations like that, and it never seemed to happen. And then, whilst God doesn't cause pandemics and doesn't make them happen, I feel like we all have this opportunity right now. We've literally been kicked out of our buildings for a year. We haven't had them. We haven't been able to meet in them. But the church has carried on. Here at St. Andrew's, you've done an amazing thing in reaching out to the community through the CCGS. I always get that wrong. Is that kind of right? Yeah? CCSG, thank you, Tim. Through CCSG. And it's amazing to see how you've blessed the community. And I'm so proud to be a part of that now. But that can't be where it stops. From this point on, we have to always be looking out, thinking of the building secondary. It has to be in our homes where we have community, in our parks, on the common, in our gardens, especially now, in your gardens, a great place to have community. But we need to reach out. We need to show that the church isn't about the building. It's about community. God didn't call us to build buildings. He called us to build up one another and to build our communities. And that is what we should do. And it's not going to be easy. Being in community is messy. People get hurt. People get angry. Things go wrong. But that is where true life and true love grow. The Message translation of John 1:14 says, "The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory of God with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish." When we reach out of our bubble, when we step out and we say, I'm going to make friends with people that might make me look bad, I'm going to make friends with people that I'm not necessarily always comfortable around, I'm going to make friends with people and be with people that aren't my usual cup of tea, we introduce them to Jesus in a small way. We give them a little glimpse of heaven. We show them what is on offer. And it's up to them whether they take that further. No one is going to see the glory of God if we don't show it to them.